Hello, BookTube. Welcome to another episode of Essay. Today, it's a little different. I've been reading from collections. This is from a magazine, the Chambers Journal of Popular Literature, Science, and Art, from Saturday, August 30th, 1890. It's entitled The Sufferings and Death of Books. There's no author to this, so it's unknown exactly. I don't know who's written this. I have not done a search to find out either. But it could be the editor. It could be one of their writers at large. It was a magazine that started in 1832 and it went until 1956. And it was published weekly at 16 pages each. It had essays, sort of a week's happenings in science, fiction, serialized fiction, and in this volume that I have here, there's a 4-part serialized story of Arthur Conan Doyle. That was, I think it's in this volume, 1890. But yeah, we'll read this and see how we get along. The Sufferings and Death of Books. Do you love your books? Books have bodies as well as souls. Do you care for the material tabernacle which enshrines the spirits that warm and brighten your own? Slaves of the lamp, they are ready at a moment's notice to come forth and transport you not only to the foreign regions upon earth, but to mystic scenes in worlds unknown. They will build castles for you in the air and chateaux en Espagne, and will people them with figures that sometimes seem startlingly near, a descent from the canvas of the imagination onto the solid floor of tangibility. But the bodies of your books, how do you house them? Do you guard them from excessive cold and excessive heat? Do you save them from being poisoned by foul gases and from consumption through exposure to damp and from attacks of vermin? Do you provide them with medicine and medical attendance in their diseases? Do you belong to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Books? We are not aware that there is such a society, but that is a mere matter of detail. We feel disposed, like the fat boy, to make your flesh creep by recounting some of the brutalities practiced towards books. Books have perished by fire on notable occasions, as in the case recorded in Acts 19:19, where the books destroyed are valued at 50,000 pieces of silver. They were either treatises on magic, books of sorcery, or Ephesia Grammata, little scrolls containing magic sentences and carried about as charms. The martyrdom of living flesh and sentiment nerves runs through all the centuries alongside of the cremation of the books that enshrined the martyrs' doctrines. Tyndale translates the Bible. The Bishop of London buys up the impression and consigns it to the flames. With the proceeds, Tyndale prints many more than were burned. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, and the smoke of the burning scripture is the printer's capital. Orthodox and heterodox are pretty evenly balanced in their fiery judgments on the enemy's books. Much rubbish has thus perished, but the coiling wreaths of smoke from the martyr fire of the true book have always formed the letters resurgam. Ignorance as well as flaming orthodoxy has incinerated many a precious book. One shudders to read of valuable black leather volumes, Caxtons, and others being found in the baskets of Sally or Betty, the melancholy relics of hundreds that may have preceded them up the chimney of some parlor fire or kitchen grate. And one trembles to think how many absolutely priceless manuscripts probably are, at this moment trembling about amid dust and vermin in old monasteries and cellars and caves, not knowing whether their destiny be destruction or the enthusiastic welcome in the British Museum or Bodleian or some continental harbour or refuge. Water has played quite a terrible part as fire in the massacre of books. We are not thinking of the whole libraries that have been lost at sea, though it is true that the cultured fishes have not lacked literary pablum, but of all the slow torture of books by damp. It is a relief to know that books do not suffer from rheumatism and neuralgia, though we have nightmare suspicions on this point. But they suffer decay in the symbolic parallelism to human lapses into diseases and towards the tomb. The fiber of the paper and binding succumbs to the damp. Brown blotches appear, and finally the maltreated book loses all its vitality and crumbles into powder at the touch. College libraries have been known in which books have never been comforted with a fire, and where ivy or other tendrils have crawled in through broken panes in neglected windows and made tracks for the heavy dews, the condensed November fogs and driving autumn rains, and the unhappy books have slowly rotted in their prison in the company of fungi and slugs, like forgotten prisoners of some condemned faith in the oblites of stony-hearted ecclesiastics. Collections of books subject to modern conditions are afflicted by the same causes of disease to which many of our own maladies are due. Their health perishes under the fumes of gas, the sulphurous element in the midnight gas, which not to our advantage has supplanted the midnight oil, destroys the elasticity and the robustness of their bindings, and eats away their strength. Under the influence of the gaseous acids and the drying effects of heat, you will see the constitution of our poor books showing the inroads of disease and the approach of death. And of course, your top shelf goes first. It is not true that there is nothing like leather. In point of the conditions of firm, robust health, your leather-covered books are very like children. They want a pure atmosphere, not too hot, nor too cold, nor too dry, nor too damp. And if your books are ailing, look after your children in the same room. Dust and neglect have to bear the responsibility of much suffering on the part of your books. The custom of gilding the top edges of books is a useful palliative, but like all palliatives, it is not too much relied on. There are glass doors to bookcases so voluble as people nor are glass doors to bookcases so voluble as people suppose. The alterations of temperature create a constant in and out suction, and with the air goes the dust, and the dust partially consists of germs, always going up and down in the earth seeking what they may devour. Bookworms are now almost exclusively known in the secondary and derivative meaning of the word as porers over dry books. But there was a time when there was a time when the real worms were as ubiquitous as our cockroaches. They would start at the first and last page and tunnel circular holes through the volume, and were cursed by librarians as bestia audax or pestis chartarum. There were several kinds of these little plagues. One was a sort of death watch, a dark brown hard skin. Another had a white body with little brown spots on its head. Those that had legs were the larvae of moths, and those without legs were grubs that turned to beetles. They were dignified like other disagreeable things with the Latin names which we will spare our readers. All of them had strong jaws and very healthy appetites, but we are happy to find now that their digestive powers, vigorous as they were, quail before the materials of our modern books. China clay, plaster of Paris, and other unwholesome ailments have conquered the pestis chartarum. They sigh and shriveled up. Goodbye, little wretches. We have worse than you to look after now. Germs of fever and cholera and hydrophobia to keep us busy, and we are staggered to discover that pitched battles are being fought in our veins every day by our brave little white corpuscles. Peace to the memory, for it is now hardly more than a memory of the bestia audax. The most audacious beast of our days is the cutter out of plates. Where is our library that cannot show evidence of his ravages? Towards him we feel a ferocity that is merciless. We should like to extract a tooth without anesthetics for every plate he has purloined. A giant villainy of this kind persisted in the earlier part of the last century. His awful robberies were bound up in about 100 volumes now in the British Museum. There is a feebler but still more irritating form of outrage upon books in public libraries, which consists in scrawling on the margins the vapid and frivolous criticisms or opinions of the reader, who often unconsciously gives evidence that he is incapable of appreciating what he reads. We have a book before us now, the collected poems of the great poetess of our century, and there is hardly a page not disfigured by some trumpery cavil about the words or the sense or the rhythm. Through all the sweet thoughts, this pestis chartarum follows her until we take up the poker and strike a blow at an imaginary skull too thick to break and too empty to be susceptible of concussion of the brain. We are growing hot and will lay down the topic here lest we need a cooling febrifuge. Well, there ends the essay, The Sufferings and Death of Books. And it's written with a bit of humor, obviously. But he doesn't seem to mind too much violence against perpetrators of damaging books. Well, so I'll dip in back and forth into this because, as I say, there are quite a few essays throughout the volumes I have, and they all seem to be quite interesting. So we'll leave it there for now, BookTube, and I will see you next time.